pleasant, fulfilled, whole. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not going to say that if we go back to the 8 basic Bahava there, yeah, it's very similar to most Disney films, you know, or at least to the classic Disney films. Just watched a fairly extensive documentary on Walt Disney. He didn't identify Sanskrit as any of his influences, but so some of the performance characteristics. So this would be sponsored by wealthy households. Now, if you know anything about India's societal history, there's a very specific caste structure of the class system in which you're born into that caste. It wasn't until the 20th century that you could really get out of it in any way, shape, or form. So the wealthy, mostly Brahmin households, would sponsor these events, and there would be seating areas that were color-coded by caste, so that it's possible that some of the lower caste people were able to see these plays, but not very likely. Okay? As I said, it's basically a platform, curtain, and the audience seating area. Usually both were covered, because if you know anything about India in the summertime, well, most of the year, it's kind of hot. Kind of hot. So it had a rear curtain with some decoration on it. Again, a 4-post covered, basically open platform, but again, adorned with garlands and ribbons and just anything that would make it look lush and glorious. And that kind of went for the costumes as well. Now, one big difference, women were allowed to perform in Sanskrit drama. Mostly, well, female stage attendants were part of the aesthetic fulfillment of literally ladies that would stand there sort of as statues in elegantly adorned outfits and shift their position from time to time, or sometimes add some, like, what I would guess you would call sort of like uniform unison movement along with any musical accompaniment. I just love this, that the stage also featured guards that were described as persons with sticks to keep people from interrupting the performance. Yeah. Rome and Greece could use a little bit of that. So, again, just like we have with Kabuki and Peking opera, we have a very rigid set of trained sort of postures, hand gestures, and so forth that all have different emotional qualities attached to them. And this comes out of the fact that these all sort of originated as dance movements. So that there are actually, say, 31 different positions of the foot that have a different emotional characteristic to them. There are 33 positions of the eyes that have different characteristics to them. 6 nose positions that have different emotional characteristics to them. So goes on and on and on about the specificity of this person has to be presenting, you know, in a certain posture in order to carry with it its direct meaning. Don't ask me to identify what all the individual different ones mean. Fail. But know that they were present. So, just kind of in comparison, by conclusion, in Western theater, we're talking about action and episode-based plays where plot and character are the soul of the play. But in Sanskrit, it's a series of sort of emotional moods that ultimately dominate the emotion at the end. Now, that's not to say that there aren't action, episode, and plot characteristics in Sanskrit, because there are, but its ultimate goal is not necessarily telling the story. Its ultimate goal is fulfilling the audience's experience in a pleasant way that leaves you with that sense of harmony and understanding. Okay. So, again, this is a very unique, in the world of theater, sort of set of constructs that accompany this play that you're going to be reading for Tuesday. And I think that that helps to kind of set some of its background and circumstance for you a little bit more, because it is, as I said, it's like a giant long fairy tale. We take trips to heaven, we take trips to other worlds, there's some mystical things that happen, there's fish eating things they shouldn't, all kinds of fun things.
Just had like a broad question. What was the rest of the world besides the countries that you mentioned, like England and Greece and all that, like, you know, the countries that were a country, like, you know, Russia or, you know, the Baltic countries, or
well,
Cambodia, you know, those.
I can, at this time, we're talking about the dark ages of Europe. We're talking on the, particularly the North and South American continents, we're talking about a time when written histories really didn't exist. So there were certainly civilizations, if they were doing any kind of performance. I mean, we do know that things like the Mayans, you know, had human sacrifices done as a ritual ceremony. As far as like Russia goes, it's kind of a vast wasteland at this point. But throughout most of Europe, it is feudal peasant society, a lord who lords over his little plot of land with, you know, a little community of peasants toiling away toiling away to eke out a meager living. And not much is happening culturally, and we'll explain a bit more about that. So any cultural evidence that was happening was around monasteries and churches.
So China would probably be something like that too, right?
Well, as I don't know as much about Peking opera, but this time period is one of flourishing in Asia. So that there actually is a fair amount of, like, I'm going to say, adventurous crossover between. So there was likely, certainly, you know, some people that probably introduced ideas of Peking opera into Japan, and that may have influenced, because Peking opera did precede kabuki a little bit. But there is, throughout the first millennia AD, in China, we do have evidence of, I'll call it rudimentary theater movements that lead into this more spectacular spectacle that Peking opera is. So throughout Asia, at this time, there's more happening than there is throughout the rest of the world.
So going back to the whole, like, having guards, like, are they, like, by the platform so they won't, like, disrupt the whole thing? Or is it, like, if somebody...
Yeah, no, they're not, like, on the middle of the stage. They're kind of...
No,
but they are adorned as part of the beauty.
Okay.
So they're, you know, they're probably young, muscular dudes that, you know, wearing some nice robes that sparkle and carrying a stick.
I was thinking, like,
beautiful women adorning.
Yeah.
I didn't know if somebody was saying something and it's like kind of distracting in a way, where like they go and just whack them or something.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know that part of the adornment of the stage was the guards, who were described as persons with sticks.
You said that the performances were sponsored by households, but what were the classes typically of the performers?
Good question. I don't actually know. I would suspect, as with most of them, they're probably just above the you know, peasant class. So it was probably more of the merchant and artisans.
They probably have to be a little bit educated, right? To read and learn.
Well, again, a lot of this was probably taught to them by spoken line. You know, here's your line next, so that, you know, the educated ones are the ones that are informing the others. I don't know, but, you know, sophisticated education systems not in place at this time. Any education is typically going on through the churches, monasteries, and temples.
For performing arts as a profession throughout history, I guess even now you can look at it as something that a lot of times people get into the circumstance of it's something that they do, but it's, they also have to live elsewhere. And I'm just wondering how that's been treated in relation to how the status of performance has been throughout time in different places and different regions and such.
Well, as we saw in Greece, you had to do something else because the performances were typically about once a year. But you were rewarded if your play won. But oftentimes, the wealthier tyrants or the wealthier leaders of the Athens community, remember it was kind of segmented into 10 different districts, they would supplement their rehearsal income, if you will. Once we get into Rome, the patriarchs that again sponsored these events, they were paying the actors. And some of the actors, such as Roscius, was very well compensated. As we just saw in the kabuki element, at least with no theater, the actors that were becoming the professionals were sponsored by the Buddhist temple. So there's evidence that, I would say there's evidence that they're making a living, they're getting by. Only a few of them are getting rich off of it. Kind of the way it is now.
How about like the play writers? How much money do they make?
Well, particularly